All right, welcome back to the channel, guys. So it's springtime and spring really snuck up on me. So I decided to get on here and I figured maybe somebody wants to go through starting their garden with me. Now, what if you don't even have a garden yet? That's okay. You can still start your seeds. We will actually be starting a garden plot about 35 minutes from where we currently are here in the next month. So if you hit the subscribe button, you won't miss a video, because we're actually going to talk about starting a brand new garden. And that is, it's just raw land right now. There's nothing there. It was a cattle farm, but now we need to add a garden there. So we're going to actually go through that process here shortly and tag along. That way you can figure out how to start your garden. The best advice I would say as far as starting that garden would definitely be start thinking about where you want the garden to be. Where is an ideal location where you'll get plenty of sun. Morning sun is always important. So start thinking about that, and in the meantime, start some seeds with us. So we do two different types of plantings here in our garden. We do direct sowing, which is where you take the seed and you directly sow it into the soil. Now, it's late March, early April, and I am in zone 6B. And the soil can be worked right now. So you can actually go ahead and start direct sowing anything that is like a cold hardy, frost tolerant crops. So I'll actually be direct sowing some scallions here soon and doing some peas, which those are always my favorite. So those are things that you can start now. And for things that I'm not going to be able to directly sow right now, I'm actually going to start in cells. So I'm going to transplant those. I will start them in their own little pot, and then I will put them in the garden when the time is ready. We do a lot of transplanting here, mainly because honestly, our growing season isn't as long as we would like. So for an example, tomatoes. Tomatoes will take about 72 days to harvest. Different varieties are always different, but if I did not start those early, I probably would not get a harvest before the first frost actually came in my region. So we're gonna actually start transplants of tomatoes, peppers, kale, broccoli, which this year will be a first for broccoli in our garden, which I'm super excited about. We enjoy starting our own seeds for many reasons. Of course, to basically get a head start on the growing season itself. But it's enjoyable. You take this tiny little seed and you put it in this soil and you watch it grow. We really enjoy it. And seeds are actually very inexpensive compared to buying a plant that is already, grown from like your local nursery, which is totally fine. If you don't want to start your own seeds, go to your local nursery. If you go to the local nursery, you know where the seed's coming from or where the plant is coming from, and you know that it got plenty of TLC. And if you are unsure of that, ask somebody at the nursery. I'm sure they would love to actually talk to you about where their plants came from and the process of starting their seeds. There are a few important concepts about starting your own seeds. This one I think is really, really important, and it's basically just timing. You don't want to, so every seed takes a certain amount of time to germinate and then a certain amount of time until harvest. So for an example, cucumbers. Okay, cucumbers do not take that long to actually germinate and to actually start growing, and until they hit that maturity and you can start actually harvesting the fruit. Cucumbers are ones that you probably wouldn't want to start until 2 to 4 weeks before your last frost date. So keep that in mind. You always want to make sure that you're looking at your seed packets and you're figuring out how long it takes for the maturity of the plant. So you don't want to start something too early. We are going to go ahead and start our peppers, and our tomatoes, and we do have some salad heads that we have started. Kales, the broccoli, cabbage. Now for us, we have a frost cover. Okay, so when you put these things, if you have a frost cover, then you could potentially go ahead and start a lot of these seeds also. And if there's a risk of frost, cover your plants up. We don't ever want stunted, unhappy plants, okay? We want happy, healthy plants, happy, healthy seedlings. The next thing would be, what are we gonna put the seeds in? I'm big about, like, use what you have. Use your resources. When we first got started, we bought a lot of our plants from a local nursery, and we actually kept the trays, and we washed them out and we reused them. Now that was 5 years ago, 6 years ago. So we went out and we actually bought our seed trays. You can see right here. So we have bought our seed trays. You would buy the seed cells, and then you would want to also buy, oh, this one's got a little bit of, like a tray for those to go in, because this can get, if there's nothing in there, it can be really flimsy. So you want to have like a carrying tray for your seed trays. Okay, so it can be a little bit of a cost to get started, but keep in mind that you can always reuse these. You know, so you can see here, I mean, we even have ours labeled right here, 128 cell tray, and we have had these now for 4 years. Some break, but we recycle them and get new ones. But they last a really long time. And so we actually buy ours. We have bought some from Johnny Seeds. And then we actually have bought ours from a grower, a grower up in Pennsylvania. They have a lot of farm supplies up there. So we have bought some from up there, and these are all recycled plastic, which is awesome. I also like them because, and I like to go ahead and buy these because, oh, these holes, the drainage holes. So they're already in there. There's no thinking behind it. That's one thing you have to keep in mind is your plants, they need a lot of great drainage. You don't ever want the soil to be saturated. It just needs to be moist. So with this, no problem. The drainage holes are there where they need to be, no problem at all. But with that being said, anybody that's just getting started, use what you have. If you have red Solo cups at home from, you know, a party that you had last season, use them. Dixie cups, use them. I have a friend that used egg cartons that she was recycling, and it worked. You may have to transplant them into something bigger, but to get them started, that's okay. So use what you have. Like I said, we use these trays, these plastic trays. Rebelski, that's from last season, 2 seasons ago, who knows. But yeah, so use what you have. So the trays are incredibly important. Something else to think about is definitely labeling. So if you're like us, you know, a lot of times we have different trays that have different things in them. So like this tray. This tray has 2 different types of kales, Swiss chard, and broccoli in there. So I have, which this guy needs watered, it looks like. So I have winter boar kale and then black magic kale. The black magic kale is going to be new to the garden this year. We're super excited about that. I love kale. But anyways, they look relatively pretty similar. Okay? But for myself in my garden, I want to have a row of the black magic kale and a row of the winter boar kale. I don't want just random black magic mixed in with the winter boar. So that's why labeling is so important. For these guys, I did use popsicle sticks. you can see how so far so good. Hopefully it doesn't mess with the writing. I don't think it will because I used a marker, but if not, I also recycled all of the labels that I used or that I've accumulated over the last couple years for plants that I've bought from local nurseries. Tons. And so I'll just actually, I will just plant on the back of these, or plant it. I will label the back of these. So you can see this one already has a label from last season, 2 seasons ago, who knows, but I'll just write right over that and I'll use this as a label. But that is incredibly important. So you definitely want to make sure that you have all of your labels ready before you start doing your seeds. That's important. So we are going to start filling up some trays, and then we will get to doing some seeding. So I'm going to show you. We're just going to go ahead and fill up this tray. And this is going to be for some peppers, which actually I'm going to get. I'm going to get my carrying tray first and put these in here. We're gonna fill these bad boys up. Now, once you get the soil in here, you want to make sure that the tray is completely full, and you want to make sure that you don't want a bunch of air pockets in there. So we're gonna use another tray to just kind of make sure everything is, make sure the cells are full. Now, because my soil here is not really dampened, it's not moist, and I'm gonna have to go water it in first. Once I water this in, it may actually, you may notice that the soil is going to settle. And so it'll end up, like for an example, may end up looking like this. And I'll just go back and I'll add a little bit more soil so that my soil is at the top of the tray. Now the seeds, something to remember is the seeds are small. A lot of seeds are very small, and that's why we're using this seed starting mix, this finer mix. We want everything to be able to germinate through here. So you don't want to compact it too much, but you want it to be just enough. So I'll actually get another tray, and this is just what I do. I just lightly will tap it in there. And I think we're actually okay. We're good to go. So we'll get ready and we will water this guy in to get it ready for some seeds. I do have some, what is that? Is that straw? So we're gonna water these so they are ready for some seeds. Once you have the trays, what you're gonna put the seeds in, the next thing that you need is seeds, right? So we personally here for our garden, we buy from Johnny Seeds. There's a few other growers or seed suppliers that we buy from, but mainly Johnny Seeds. They don't provide anything GMO. They're very awesome. They have a ton of resources on their website, which is awesome. They also, if you ever have a question, you can call them and they're incredibly friendly. They go over everything with you. So we buy the majority of our seeds from Johnny Seeds. And just to show you, a little packet here. So now when you go to buy your seeds, the majority of the seed packets will have some information on the back, okay? That is so important. This is going to tell you everything that you need to know about your seeds. And so basically, if it's recommended that you direct seed them, there are some plants, like especially root plants, your root crops, those type of things you want to directly sow into the ground. This also tells you harvest. So like for this is winter boar kale, hybrid kale, and you can harvest this about 2 months after sowing. Temperature wise, so this says typically to get it to germinate, ideally the temperature is 75 degrees of the soil. Which brings me to my next point actually. Where do you put these trays once you seed them? Well, that's incredibly important, especially for all these warm crops, because you might not be able to put them outside right now. For us, we have this nursery. So this was an old shed that we ended up removing the siding and putting up greenhouse plastic. And so we can actually bring these out here during the day. So every morning we will actually bring these outside. It's a little bit of a task, but it's worth it. And we will put them in here so that the seeds get the heat and the sun all day. You can definitely keep your plants inside. I would highly recommend that you find a south-facing window that gets plenty of sunlight. That way, one thing about seedlings is they definitely will search for the sun. So you don't want to end up with leggy plants, right? Or you could always think about investing in growing lights. Those you also will continue to use every season. If you are going to use growing lights, then you want to actually keep your trays, your seedlings, about 2 to 3 inches from the lights. So again, so that those plants actually don't stretch towards the light and become leggy plants. We will be doing some tomatoes, some peppers today. I will be doing some more trays of kale and broccoli and some cabbage. One thing to keep in mind also, so before we start planting this, actually sowing the seeds into the seed starting mix, you have to know how deep the seed goes. Okay, so not every seed is treated the same. Every seed has a different shape, a different size. So for things like, for an example, your basil seeds, there's onion seeds, carrot seeds especially, all of those seeds are very small. So you really don't want to bury them into the soil too deep. General rule of thumb is to bury them twice as deep as the size of the seed, or as deep as the width of the seed. And then you have some really large seeds like, oh my goodness, squash seeds, cucumber seeds. You'll actually notice that they are round at the top and they have a little flat surface. The flat part is actually where the root is going to come out of the seed, and you want that root to go down. So with those seeds, you will actually you'll want to make sure, the bigger seeds, that you're pushing it down into the soil deep enough, and that the bottom portion of the seed is at the bottom and the round part is at the top of the seed starting mix. So like with carrots, if you're direct sowing those guys into the soil in the garden, we make the tiniest little row and then place the seed in there and you just rough up the soil on top. That's all you need to do for those seeds. It's in there. Put a little bit of soil over it and it's ready to go. With watering, a lot of people will actually compare it to a sponge, and I think I love that because it just makes sense when you think about it. So it's like a sponge. You want a wet sponge, you don't want a saturated sponge. So you want that sponge just to be damp. The same thing with your soil. So you don't want the soil to be too wet. You want it to be just moist. Now, after your, there's a few things that you can do as far as watering goes. So for us, I'm actually going to take our trays inside and I'm going to water them in the sink with my sink sprayer. Mainly because it's very light. You don't want to disrupt that soil. You don't want to dislodge the seed. You want to lightly water it. Or if you have like a light watering can, you can use that. Some people actually use like a spray bottle that they spritz, and they'll even do that after the plant has actually sprouted as well. If you're using a spray bottle, you'll just want to make sure that you're spraying it on a daily basis, because you may not be able to get that soil actually saturated enough that it's the bottom is also saturated or moist. We don't want saturated plants. But you want to make sure that the entire cell has water and is moist. Another good way to water is, we like to use trays. We like to use the trays that don't have any drainage holes in the bottom, and that way you're watering from the bottom up, and so it gets as much water as it wants, and that's it. So I'll show you what that looks like.
This flat right here, we are watering from the bottom.
They all say, and it is true, I mean, you have to treat these guys like they're your babies. They are very precious, and the smallest thing could definitely damage these seedlings. Like for an instance, you know, with these guys here, so here are some tomato plants that I have over here. If these tomato plants, if I just left these guys outside and just left for the day, and say it would start raining, what could potentially happen is that rain could mess with the soil and wash away a lot of the soil. It could damage the plants. We don't want that. Also, just the other day, I had a bird out here that, I don't know what he was doing, but I'm pretty sure it was with the kale. He was plucking a couple of the kale leaves off. I wish I would have got that on camera. That would have been too funny. But yeah, you definitely have to give your plants a little TLC. But in the long run, guys, like, just do it. Just plant. There's rules for everything, but just do it. You know, you're always going to make mistakes. I mean, we've been gardening now and we're definitely not experts by no means. We've been gardening now for about 6 years, and we're always learning something new. Always. There's something that can always be learned in a season. You'll make mistakes. Who cares? It doesn't matter. Brush it off. Sometimes we get a little like, oh man, and just so just for an example, these poor guys. These are our Salanova lettuce heads. So these were the first things that we actually directly seeded into these trays for the season. So the first thing that we planted. And you can see these have been out here the longest. So 4 weeks, maybe? Oh man, I should know that. About 4 weeks. And actually you can see where the soil is getting a little bit of like a green tint to it. That's from poor circulation. So that fan is definitely needed. But anyways, these guys, this is a Salanova lettuce head. They're relatively pretty hardy. Typically, we will have 100% germination, but you can see where we have some that did not germinate. And most likely that is because we may or may not, definitely did, leave these guys outside like 3 times, and it was way too cold. We just forgot about them. Like I said, we had a lot going on last month, and we neglected these guys. We walked outside and literally the entire tray was frozen. The entire tray. And we were both so bummed out. And but then by the end of the day when we came home from work, they were doing just fine. So your plants definitely need good soil, good drainage, they need sunlight, air circulation, and a little bit of TLC.